Sagittarius, the love that made you feel alone even when you weren't. There are kinds of loneliness that appear only when someone else is standing right beside you. The kind that doesn't arrive in the empty hours of the night, but in the moments when you're held, when you're kissed, when you're told all the words you once believed would be enough. It is a strange ache, isn't it? How a woman can feel most unseen right inside the arms of the person she hoped would finally notice her. Sagittarius, welcome back. Tonight I want to walk with you into a quiet room inside your heart. The room where you stayed too long, waited too long, forgave too long. The room where you kept choosing softness even when it cost you pieces of yourself. Maybe you're here because you once loved someone who wasn't cruel, wasn't dismissive, wasn't a monster in any dramatic way, yet still managed to make you feel unbearably small. Maybe you loved a man who held you close but never held you fully. A man who touched your skin but never touched your life. A man whose presence was warm, but whose absence, silent, sharp, frequent, became the true shape of the relationship. Tonight's story is not about villainizing him. It's about liberating you. It's about the moment a Sagittarius woman, brave, seasoned by life, carrying both scars and wisdom, finally sees the truth beneath the illusion. That sometimes the pain doesn't come from someone's cruelty, but from your own tenderness given to the wrong hands. Let's begin. Map 1, the soft beginning she wanted to believe in. When warmth was still enough, Olivia met him on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of evening that never intends to become a turning point in anyone's life, yet somehow does. She had just finished a long day at work, the kind of day filled with emails, meetings, and small frustrations that used to make her feel drained but now only made her feel older. Being in her mid-40s had taught her the art of conserving energy, of choosing her battles, of staying quiet when silence felt kinder than speaking. So when she stepped into the little wine bar her friend convinced her to visit, she wasn't expecting anything except a couple hours of escape. He was there, leaning against the counter, laughing with the bartender, the kind of laughter that made a room soften. She noticed it only because she hadn't heard that kind of softness in a long time, not directed at her, not in her world where strength had become both armor and identity. He glanced at her just once, a passing look, but something in that look lingered. Not flirtation, not intention, just awareness, the subtle acknowledgement of one soul recognizing another. She found a seat, ordered a drink, and tried to stay invisible, but he didn't let her. He approached gently, with an easy smile and a question about the book she had placed on the table. It was a simple conversation, but simple conversations can be dangerous for women who have spent years holding themselves together. There was something about the way he listened, not intensely, not theatrically, but with a quiet presence that made her feel seen without having to perform. She hadn't realized how starved she was for that kind of presence until it appeared. In the following days, their connection grew almost unintentionally, like sunlight drifting into a room through a crack in the curtains. They had coffee that turned into long, wandering conversations about childhood, second chances, and the strange loneliness that often accompanies middle age. He had a way of leaning in when she spoke, a tenderness in his eyes that made the world feel a little less harsh. When they walked together, he'd place his hand gently on her back. Not possessive, just caring, which reminded her of a version of intimacy she thought she had aged out of. Sagittarius women don't fall in love easily, not after life has shown them enough of its teeth. But when they sense sincerity, even the slightest hint of it, they open up in quiet, hopeful ways. Olivia felt something shifting. Not a grand spark, not a sudden blaze, but a slow warmth blooming in the ribs of someone who had forgotten she could still be chosen. She didn't tell anyone about him yet. She wanted this softness to be hers alone for a little while, unexamined, unburdened by opinions. What drew her in wasn't grand gestures. It was the small details, the way he brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear without hesitation, the way he remembered her favorite tea, the way he said goodnight like he meant it. Those small acts became tiny seeds of hope planted in the soil of a woman who had learned to live without expecting much. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of something gentle, something steady, something hers. She didn't yet realize she was falling for the beginning, not the man. That she was holding on to the glow, not the flame. But in that moment none of that mattered. In that moment warmth was still enough. Map 2. The slow disappearance behind his sweetness. Where his touch stayed but he didn't. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't arrive with storms. It arrives in fragments, quiet pauses, delayed replies, small hesitations that echo louder than shouted words. For Olivia, it began softly, almost imperceptibly, like the dimming of a lamp you don't notice until the room has already darkened. At first, it was the pauses in their conversations. She would share something tender, an old memory, a rough day, a moment of vulnerability, and he would respond with kindness, yes, but there was a faint distance in his gaze, as if part of him was already elsewhere. Yet every time he reached for her hand, every time he kissed her forehead with that sweet, lingering affection, the distance blurred again, and she convinced herself she was imagining it. Sagittarius women are intuitive, but they are also hopeful. They sense shifts before they see them, but they often give grace long after the shift has become a pattern. Olivia did too. She noticed the late replies, the unanswered messages, the hours he went missing without a single line. She tried to swallow the sting of it, reminding herself he was busy, reminding herself grown adults have complicated lives. But even busy men find time for the things that matter. She knew that. She just wasn't ready to admit it. What made everything confusing was this. When he was with her, he was wonderful, gentle, attentive, charming in a way that felt effortless. He'd tuck her hair behind her ear and say, "I like how peaceful you look." He'd pull her into his chest like he could shelter her from the world. In those moments she felt chosen. She felt cherished. She felt home. But the moment she stepped out of his door, the connection dissolved into smoke. She'd text him something simple. "Did you get home safe?" And it would sit unread for hours. A call would go straight to voicemail, not once but repeatedly. She started noticing how his availability shifted depending on who else was around. When he was alone, she was everything. When he was with friends, she was optional. She didn't know how to name that kind of inconsistency, so she named it patience instead. There was a night, quiet, unremarkable but unforgettable, when she realized how deeply she was adjusting herself to fit him. She had planned to tell him she had been feeling overwhelmed at work, that she could use a comforting voice. But something about the way he casually mentioned he was heading out with friends made her swallow her need mid-sentence. She smiled instead. "Have fun," she said. "Enjoy your night." He didn't notice her disappointment. She didn't let him. Because now she feared her needs would become too heavy for the soft, delicate way he held her. She feared that if she asked for more, he would quietly drift away. So she learned to cushion her emotions, to edit her texts, to erase the parts of her that felt too vulnerable. And here's the painful truth she didn't dare speak aloud. She started pretending she didn't need him, because he was already living as though she didn't. There was a day he canceled plans because he was tired, only for her to see a photo posted later of him laughing at a bar with friends. She stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, not hurt, just tired. Tired of giving him the benefit of every doubt. Tired of explaining away what her intuition already knew. Yet the next time they met, he wrapped his arms around her and murmured, "I missed you." And her heart, foolishly loyal, softened again. That is the danger of small tendernesses. They can overshadow large truths. She didn't notice she was building a version of him in her mind. One who was more attentive than reality, more present than fact, more loving than truth. She began loving the man he could be, not the man he was. And slowly, without realizing it, she started living in the space between what she felt and what she wished for. She kept choosing him. He kept choosing everything else. Map 3. The moment the truth stepped out of the shadows. Where her heart heard the truth before her mind did. The evening that changed everything was not dramatic. It wasn't a fight, not a betrayal, not even a disappointment sharp enough to break her. It was something quieter, almost gentle, the kind of moment life uses when it wants to whisper instead of shout. Olivia had dressed with a soft excitement that she tried not to name. A simple navy dress, a touch of lipstick, hair loosely curled. She looked at herself in the mirror, not to impress him, but to remind herself that she could still glow when she wanted to. They had planned a dinner, nothing extravagant, but enough to make her feel remembered. She arrived at the restaurant early, a habit she'd formed over the years. Better to wait than to make someone else wait for you. She chose a table by the window and watched the city sway in its weekend rhythm. She checked her phone once, then again. Minutes stretched, then folded. 40 minutes passed. She sipped water she didn't want. Her dress suddenly felt too tight. Her heart felt too exposed. When her phone finally buzzed, she already knew. Sorry, got caught up with the guys. Let's reschedule. She stared at the message for a long time. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because something inside her had finally grown quiet. A silence that wasn't resignation, but recognition. She didn't reply immediately. She didn't cry. She didn't curse him. She simply placed her phone on the table and looked outside as if she were seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. When he came over that weekend with a bottle of wine and a boyish grin, expecting his usual gentle welcome, the air between them felt different, still warm but no longer inviting. She opened the door, and the first thing she noticed was how light he looked. How unburdened. How oblivious to the weight she had been carrying alone. He kissed her cheek with that familiar sweetness and said, "You look tired. Long week." She smiled, small, polite, hollow. Something like that. They sat on the couch and he talked about his work, his friends, a funny story about a late-night conversation he'd had. His words floated around the room, but Olivia didn't catch them. She was studying him. Not the man she had crafted in her mind, but the one sitting right in front of her. The one who only showed up when it was easy. The one who loved the warmth she gave but never offered any of his own unless it was convenient. The one who held her like he cherished her, yet lived like she was optional. At one point he reached for her hand. It used to make her melt. This time it made her ache. Because now the contrast was too sharp to ignore. The man he was in her arms, and the man he was in her life. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her quiet. There was concern in his voice, but it was shallow, the kind that skims the surface without touching anything deeper. "I'm fine," she said, almost whispering. But her heart answered differently, loud and clear. "No, you're not fine. You've been lonely next to someone you're supposed to feel safe with." And then the moment of truth arrived. Not through words but through an expression. He picked up his phone while she was speaking, glanced at a message, chuckled softly and murmured, "Sorry, go on." He didn't even notice how her sentence trailed off mid-thought. How something inside her closed. In that tiny forgettable moment. Missed by him, monumental to her. She realized she had never truly met the man she loved. Only the version he became in the moments he felt like giving. The tension didn't explode. It settled. Quiet as dusk. Final as a truth finally acknowledged. And in that soft collapse, she saw herself with piercing clarity. She had been loving from the inside, while he had been watching from the doorway. Map 4. Why Sagittarius loved him harder than he deserved. When her heart wrote the story all by itself, there comes a moment in every woman's life, especially a Sagittarius woman, when she must sit with the uncomfortable truth that her heart is not just a vessel of love, but also a storyteller. It writes its own narratives, fills in missing spaces, colors the shadows to look like warmth. And Olivia, without realizing it, had been living inside a story she wrote for both of them. A story he never agreed to star in. A story he never even read. Sagittarius women are dreamers, but not the naive kind. Their dreams come with logic, instinct, and a sharp understanding of human nature. They aren't fooled easily. They simply choose hope over cynicism, possibility over limitation. And in Olivia's case, possibility became a soft, seductive escape from the loneliness she had carried so gracefully over the years. She didn't fall for him. She fell for what felt possible with him. She loved his potential. A potential he never promised, never worked toward, never even acknowledged. It was the potential she crafted from the gentle moments he offered. Like small bright tiles she used to assemble a mural much larger than the pieces. He didn't mislead her. She misread him because she wanted to. Because she needed to. Idealization is not foolishness. It is longing wearing a pretty coat. Olivia had been strong for so long. Too long. The kind of strength that exhausts rather than empowers. After years of raising children, surviving heartbreak, rebuilding her identity, and learning to function in silence, her heart was tired. Not broken, just tired. And tired hearts crave softness the way starving bodies crave warmth. So when he came with gentle touches and lingering words, her psyche did something natural. It magnified the signals. It built meaning around small gestures. It elevated subtle acts of kindness into signs of devotion. Mirror psychology whispers a painful truth here. When we've been lonely long enough, we begin to interpret attention as affection, and affection as commitment. She wasn't wrong to hope. She just hoped alone. Beneath her longing lived 3 layers of psychology she never fully addressed. Idealization. She saw the best in him, not because he showed it, but because she wanted to believe it existed. It was easier to love the imagined version of him than to sit with the emptiness of what he truly gave. Hoped projection. She projected her own capacity for love onto him. She thought he cared deeply simply because she did. But projection is a mirror, not a window. She was seeing her own reflection in his silence. Fear of truth. She sensed he was not fully choosing her, but she avoided the reality because confronting it meant acknowledging a wound she wasn't ready to revisit. The fear that maybe she was always the one who loved more. And then there was the most subtle layer, the illusion of connection. When he showed up emotionally for 5 minutes, she relived those 5 minutes for 5 days. Sagittarius women feel intensely. They replay warmth like a song stuck in their chest. She mistook his moments for his patterns, his gestures for his intentions. Yet the sharpest truth was this. She didn't ask for more because she subconsciously knew he didn't have it to give. She reduced herself to fit inside the small box of affection he offered, convincing herself it was enough because acknowledging her emptiness felt too devastating. Mirror psychology asks the question she was afraid to face. If you have to shrink to keep someone, are you really being loved, or just tolerated? By the time she realized the story was hers alone, the ending had already written itself. She wasn't losing him. She was losing the illusion she had created to comfort her own loneliness. And that kind of loss, painful as it is also the beginning of healing. Map 5. When Sagittarius finally stepped out of her own story. The day she stopped holding what hurt her. There was no dramatic goodbye. No slammed doors. No trembling voice asking for explanations that would never change anything. The end arrived the way a final autumn leaf falls. Not with noise but with inevitability. Olivia didn't leave him in anger. Anger requires too much attachment, too much fire. What she felt instead was clarity. Quiet, steady, unmistakable clarity. The kind that settles into a woman's bones when she finally stops arguing with reality. One morning, she woke up and sensed something had shifted inside her. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't disappointment. It was simply the understanding that she could no longer carry a relationship that she was holding up alone. Love shouldn't feel like a performance where one person acts and the other simply watches. Love shouldn't make you afraid of your own needs. Love shouldn't require you to become smaller, just to fit into someone's limited emotional space. She realized she had been loving him the way you hold a cactus, carefully, cautiously, hoping the softness outweighs the thorns. But the truth was undeniable. The more tightly she held, the more she bled. And he, whether unknowingly or indifferently, let her bleed because it cost him nothing. So she released the story. Released the version of him she created. Released the belief that love must be earned through patience and silence. And she walked, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the quiet power of a woman who has remembered her worth. Healing didn't come instantly. Healing rarely does. But it began in the small ways. The way she stopped checking her phone every hour. The way her evenings felt lighter without the weight of expectation. The way her heart exhaled after months of holding itself in. She returned to herself. Not the version shaped by longing, but the woman she had been before him. Strong, hopeful, whole. And as she reclaimed her own narrative, she learned something essential. There is peace in choosing yourself, even when choosing yourself means letting someone else go. She learned that the love she wanted wasn't too much. It was simply misdirected. She learned that tenderness should be mutual, not rationed. She learned that being alone is far kinder than being lonely beside someone who never truly showed up. Sagittarius. This is where your story mirrors hers. You are not too emotional, too intense, too expressive, too anything. You are a woman who loves deeply. And that is your strength, not your flaw. But deep love must flow toward someone capable of holding it. Not someone who simply enjoys the light you give while offering none in return. You deserve a love that shows up. A love that chooses you without hesitation. A love you don't have to tiptoe around. And if you haven't found it yet, it doesn't mean you are behind. It doesn't mean your time is over. Women like you, women who have lived, learned, broken, healed, carry a radiance that only grows more magnetic with age. The right person will not be intimidated by your depth. He will be drawn to it, steadied by it, grateful for it. So tell your story. Let it be a reminder to other women who are still holding on to something that keeps hurting them. Let it be a soft beacon for anyone learning to choose themselves for the first time in years. And when you're ready, truly ready, your heart will open again. Not in fear but in wisdom. Because the love you walked away from was not your last chance. It was simply the lesson that prepared you for the love you truly deserve.